Welcome to Spoonful of Strength, a podcast for people with chronic illness and the ones who love them, where we talk all things chronic. Here's your host, Rachel and Tina.
Okay, here we are. Welcome to this episode of Spoonful of Strength. Today we're going to be talking to Miranda, and she will be telling us about her POTS syndrome, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful,
which is why they call it POTS.
Sure. Yeah. And I had never heard of it until Miranda had reached out to us. Had you heard of POTS syndrome before?
Not until when I started Spoonful of Strength, then I started seeing, the people who were joining the community, and I saw a lot about POTS. And so I was actually really anxious to talk with her because I had seen quite a few people within our Spoonful community with it, and definitely wanted to hear a little bit more information about what it was. So I'm real excited to talk to her about the diagnosis and how she lives with POTS. So how was your weekend?
My weekend, it was a busy weekend. Our team, we've talked about fly ball, the dog sport that I do for a while. We've mentioned it a couple of times. So we hosted a tournament that I am typically the tournament director for. Been doing that for the last number of years. I have been acting as the tournament director for our tournament. So it's always a lot of fun, but always a lot of work leading up to. So how about you? How was your weekend?
I had a rough weekend, and the only reason I'm going to mention this is because it does spark a little bit of conversation with people with chronic illness. But I had an episode last week. If I had to guess, I would think that it was an MS hug, which I don't know if we've talked about before. But I had an episode where pretty much everything from underneath my ribs, the whole torso and everything just locked up into like a Charlie horse for like 25 minutes. It's excruciating pain. Well, I reached out to my neurologist and I said, I just wanted to let you know this happened again. This has been happening over the last couple of years. But this one was longer in length. Normally it locks up for maybe 10 minutes. This time it was more like 25 minutes. And so, I wanted to not only let them know about it, but also just see if there's something that I could do when it happens, when I feel it coming on again. And I received a response from my neurologist that said, this has nothing to do with your MS. It's probably because of your surgery. So talk to your surgeon or your PCP. Well, this has been happening over a couple of years, and I doubt my shoulder surgery had anything to do with it. So I went to my PCP, and he was annoyed that, the neurologist was dismissive. And so he puts me on a couple medicines, and I started them Thursday night, I believe. And the problem is that I started the medicines. Well, the medicines made me moody, made me fatigued, made me have really bad numbness in my hands and my feet, and had like brought up all these MS symptoms. And so yesterday I emailed the neurologist and I just said, listen, my neurologist has always said, well, muscle issues aren't from MS, which if you look on the National MS website, it talks about muscle spasms. It talks about, the things that I'm experiencing. And so I messaged them and I said, listen, I don't know how it couldn't be related, but you're not giving me any information as to why it's not related. So then I go to my PCP and they're prescribing all these nerve pain medicines that are now messing with my MS symptoms. So where do I go? So my PCP is actually referring me to a neuromuscular specialist for a second opinion because my neurologist is basically saying MS has nothing to do with muscles, which the nerves are what make the muscles work. So when you have a nerve disease, so I mean, it's just been a frustrating weekend. I was just dealing with the side effects from all that. I've since gotten off all that medication and I'm just kind of waiting to see what happens, but it can be really frustrating when you get that misinformation where your neurologist is saying this has nothing to do with your MS, when in fact there's something called the MS hug that's you can Google, it's widely known, that is the
Right.
exact same symptoms that I experienced.
Right.
So it's just been a little bit frustrating.
That's okay.
Have you ever experienced anything where you're getting like either information that doesn't sound correct or you're getting moved between doctors or any frustration like that? Because I don't know what to do at this point.
For some reason, I'm like having a brain block on what it was about, but I do remember like I just felt like every little thing was always blamed on when I had a type 2 diabetes before my weight loss surgery or something, and I would complain about, feeling tired or my sugars or, something being off or something not feeling right. And it was always like, oh, well, it was probably related to your diabetes, like related to your diabetes, related to your diabetes, related to your diabetes, or I feel like that has happened with quite a few of our guests have even mentioned how, they've gone to their doctor for something that they feel like something is going on, and the doctor attributes it to something they had already been diagnosed with versus something new. Like they have a
Yeah.
tendency to overlook something that it could possibly be something new going on or something different going on, and they just automatically assume that it's related to something else. So,
Yeah. But I think the most frustrating part is just the fact that he's basically saying the symptoms that and the episodes I'm having don't have anything to do with MS when widely you've got
publicized,
information all over the internet stating
saying
that
otherwise. Yeah.
otherwise. And so it's been a little bit frustrating, but I am
Yeah.
going to go to get the second opinion on the neurologist and see
Yeah.
what I can come up with, which of course will take months. But I just hope that I haven't had an episode in about 6 months since before last
Right.
week.
So
Just
hopefully
hoping
it
that
won't.
continue,
Yeah.
but um,
Yeah. It's
but
frustrating because it's like, well, who knows? Maybe because sometimes things like that happen too to kind of push you into the right direction of a new. You may find that this doctor is amazing and
yeah,
really progressive with MS treatment and the ins and outs of, you know, different new things on the horizon and things like that
yeah,
compared to the other ones. Seems like you might be a little more stuck with, little blinders.
yeah,
Some doctors have that tendency to put blinders on and not necessarily want to think that it's
yeah.
something
And
related.
that's what I'm kind of hoping for because anytime I've had any sort of muscle issue, I've had muscle weakness going on for 6 years now, and it's always just been dismissed, and the muscle issues are getting worse. And so there is no doctor that deals with muscle issues except for a neurologist or a neuromuscular
Hmm.
neurologists who specialize in neuromuscular diseases. So the doctor I'm going to be seeing does specialize in neuromuscular, and so it might be the option that I need to be able to even switch neurologists and get overall better care. So we will see what happens, but
And I apologize. There
forgot.
is a chance that I actually am out of town like not far out of town, only an hour away, down in the Gaylord National Harbor, just outside of DC, just spending a quick little getaway night. So there's a chance that I may end up having to bow out based on when Dave, my fiance, arrives. I have to go. Apparently apparently the elevators, you have to use your room key in order to even activate the elevators, and I have both keys, so he's going to have to call and let me know when he's there, and I'm going to have to go pick him up. So then I may timeline wise, I may miss a little bit of the. I promise Rachel's not hugging all the questions if I suddenly disappear.
If Tina suddenly disappears, we did not kidnap her or mute
I am not
her line.
MIA.
Yes, yes. But anyway, let's go ahead and bring Miranda in. I'm real excited to talk to her today. So let's go ahead and bring her in.
Thank you so much for joining us, Miranda. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, or a little bit about your background, where you're from?
Yeah, so my name is Miranda Stuck. I'm from Sammamish, Washington, which is just a suburb outside of Seattle. And I grew up in Seattle until I attended college, which I started at University of Arizona and transferred to Fordham University in Manhattan, actually. I was always dreaming of living in New York City, but what really brought me there was dancing, actually. And I've been pursuing dance as long as I can remember. So I was dancing throughout middle school, high school, and then there was a point that came at the end of my junior year of deciding to actually pursue it at a collegiate level. And from there, everything I do is involved in the arts because now I freelance when I'm able to, and I also act and I write. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. What type of dance do you enjoy the most?
I grew up only training classical ballet, so I was living in like point shoes, basically 2.5 hours to 3 hours a day. It was very intense. Now I would say I'm a completely different dancer. I enjoy musical theater. I love tap. I love jazz, Fosse style type jazz, what you would see in like the musical Chicago. And I sing as well. So my goal was always like my dream since I was 3 years old was always Broadway.
Hmm. One Broadway play or musical, what would you do?
Ooh, that's hard. I would
Sorry,
have
this is exciting for me because I love music and
I
stuff.
do too.
So
I love musical. I
yeah,
love musicals. So,
Oh,
yeah.
great. I love that. They're always the people who live for it and the people who don't really.
yeah,
They don't
absolutely.
get it. Yep. Yep.
Exactly. I would say probably being an ensemble dancer in Roger and Hammerstein's Carousel, which is a very old musical, but they did a new version of it in New York, and I think I saw it in either 2018 or 2019. And anyway, I just love the sound score and the dancing fits my style. So that would be my first show I'd love to do.
Awesome.
What's been your favorite? Have you landed some off Broadway gigs out since moving out there to the city?
Yeah, so it's been a little bit of a journey. So to answer your question also about styles, I was only really trained in ballet. And then when I went to Fordham University in New York, I attended Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, which is primarily a modern dance company. So it took some getting used to after only being trained in modern ballet to actually learn basically how to perform, like how to convince, a panel that I have a presence. And so I my first like real job in New York was actually dancing for New York Fashion Week, and so I danced for the designer Marc Jacobs at
Wow.
on the Upper East Side at the Park Avenue Armory. It's this huge space. So that was my first real professional job. Since then, I've done a couple shows. None of them have been names like in terms of the show. Most of them have been unique to the choreographer where they're creating a work. But none of them have been yet like an actual show name you would know. I do audition for them, and um, I actually a couple months ago was in callbacks for Legally Blonde. But
Oh,
with
cool.
musical theater, it's very much your type and what they're looking for in that moment, your hair color. So there's a lot of it's a very competitive world.
Right. It's not just a lot of times with the musical theater, it's not necessarily just 100% on your skill set. You have to fit the character that they're looking for. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what makes it a little more nuanced than just auditioning for a dance company, I would say.
Yeah.
I think we could probably talk about this for the full time,
Yeah.
I
but I
know.
guess we have to talk about why we actually brought you here, which is to share your story and share awareness of your illness, which is POTS. And hopefully I get this right, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Is that right?
That's right. That's correct.
POTS is
Mhm.
a lot easier to say. So we'll,
Right.
yeah. But talk about like your childhood and like your adolescence. Did you have any did you have any symptoms when you were younger that looking back you can say that maybe you had POTS at that point, or was that something that came upon in your adulthood?
That's a great question. When I was 7 years old, my mom brought me with my sister to the doctor's office to give her comfort because she was younger than me. So we thought, okay, you'll be with your sister and you can like squeeze her or hug her while she gets a shot because we were so young. Um, and so I sat there and I'm watching and, there to help her. And as the doctor went to, do the shot, I just fainted. I just literally fell over. And at that time, because I was so young, it was, oh, like we kind of just noticed it and took, maybe like made a note of it. But we just kind of kept going about like as a kid, I just kept, living life. But what would happen is then each time I would go into the doctor's office, I started fainting when it came to myself, not like when I was watching someone get help, but when I was receiving any type of treatment or care or vaccine, I would faint. And so there were a lot of times growing up where that kind of fell under the cliche, what they call the white coat syndrome, where just being around a doctor gives you anxiety. And so it was very much the way my family and everyone would speak about it is like, oh, Miranda might faint if she sees blood. That was basically what it was, is just fainting around doctors and blood. There then came a point where in high school, I was handling a lot. I was dancing a lot. I was, in a full day of school. So I had classes. My day basically went from like 7:30 a.m. to probably 8 p.m. with dancing and homework. So I was extremely tired, and I guess that time marker is significant because I made the decision, without knowing my diagnosis, I made the decision to homeschool my senior year of high school because I felt like I couldn't keep up with the demands of the school I was at, plus commuting downtown to Seattle every day to dance 3 hours. It just was too much. So from there, I was in Arizona, and there was a significant point in time when I moved to New York that I made a trip back to Arizona to visit friends. And I had an episode that was completely unexpected because up to that point, my faints were always triggered by medical spaces, anything body related. It was always triggered by a medical thing. So I had an episode that was not triggered by that, and I was, full like fainting, unconscious. So that's when I really started to wonder what was going on, and that's when, actually, of all people, my uncle on my mom's side, who is a vascular surgeon, brought forward the not the just the idea, but the term POTS to me, which I had no idea what that meant. And he basically just was thinking of me and said, "You fit a lot of these boxes. I mean, you check tons of these boxes. You crave salt, you have fatigue, you have dizziness, you faint." There were a lot of things that now looking back made sense. Um, and so it took that was the catalyst to figure out what's actually going on. And there were many fainting episodes, before that time and after that time. But it was very much a 15-year period of going about life, not realizing how fatigued and tired I was, and just wondering, what is this normal, and what's wrong with me? Why can't I stand in a museum as long as everyone else? And why am I overheating when it's not that hot? There were a lot of questions. And so in 2019 is when I finally received my diagnosis of POTS.
A couple years ago, my husband wanted to give me an MS t-shirt for my birthday. All he could find, though, were brightly colored t-shirts with big graphics, like a smiley face given 2 middle fingers, and words like F U M S. Isn't there an option for a simple, stylish t-shirt that spreads awareness with kindness? That's when I created Spoonful of Strength, shirts that are inspirational, motivational, and stylish. You can find us on Etsy, Instagram, and Facebook at Spoonful of Strength. That's Spoonful with 2 L's. Enter code PODCAST for 20% off anything in the shop.
Now, is that, I know like tachycardia is like a rapid heartbeat, or a regular, because I get that every now and then. So is that what is causing the fainting spells, or is the word tachycardia in a different context than what I'm understanding?
Yeah, so that's correct. Yeah, so POTS is essentially, it's postural, which means which position you're currently in, or switching positions, and then orthostatic, which means the standing up, the raised position, and then tachycardia, quick fluttering heartbeat, and syndrome, which just means an accumulation of symptoms. So it essentially, only actually 30% of POTS patients really have full unconscious fainting episodes. So I am in that 30%. But many or most have, they have dizziness, pre-fainting spells, what we all call episodes, where you're just too dizzy to function, essentially. And so what happens with people with POTS is that the blood isn't circulating at like the correct normal rate and speed as a normal person. And so basically when we're standing, it's pooling in the lower half of the body, the legs, a lot faster than a normal person. And so it's pooling too much in the legs, and then the head has lots of blood volume, and that's what starts the actual like either dizziness or unconsciousness.
Mm-hmm. So what testing was done to get that diagnosis? Was it blood testing, MRI, CT? Like, how did they diagnose that?
So there's a really well-known test in the POTS community called the table tilt test. And I actually waited a year for my appointment. That's how far out this neurologist who was familiar with POTS was booking. So I made the appointment, just had to wait through a full year. And once I finally saw him, they did a couple different tests. None were actually invasive in my case. And the test that really indicated POTS was the table tilt test, where they basically strap you to a table and they have you hooked up to wires which are basically keeping track of your blood pressure, your heart rate, all of your numbers, your vitals basically. And so as they're slowly raising and you're on the table, as they slowly raise the table, they're just keeping track of those numbers. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're able to see the drastic level of the difference in the numbers, because as my neurologist said, you know, everyone's heart rate rises when you go to stand up quickly. That's why some people are like, oh, I blacked out a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. The thing about people with POTS is that when we stand up, it's almost like our heart rate skyrockets. And so that's
Okay.
what the table tilt test shows.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that before. Um, okay. Isn't it crazy how, we talk a lot about how long you have to wait to see specialists and things. And, for you to have to wait a year seems absolutely crazy. But how often would you have these fainting episodes? Like before you actually got the diagnosis, how often were they happening?
Oh, they would come and go almost in like bunches. There were times where I would have a couple episodes, like one per month. I am fortunate that I didn't have them. I know I do personally know people who, faint they have daily episodes or weekly, and luckily for me, my actual unconscious faints um, were happening once every couple months. What was tricky about them was the unpredictability and also just not knowing why it was happening. So I wasn't aware enough at those times to be ready, like aware and ready to handle them. So unfortunately, like one of them, for example, I was on a hard surface floor, and I didn't feel, triggered by anything, but suddenly I just, fell. And so then it resulted in a head injury. So that's kind of the dangerous side. That's the main concern with POTS patients who do actually faint is, the risk of falling. But I also would have them, and this is a little unique to my situation rather than POTS, because I've also been diagnosed with like complex PTSD, is that I would have them in my bed as well. So I would have a nightmare and then wake up and be in a full sweat and then faint in my bed, which was very crazy, because I think there's a misconception that fainting comes from you standing, like you have to,
Yeah.
fall, oh, I'm gonna faint, and then you fall over. But you
Yeah.
can very much faint in any position, which I learned very quickly.
So do you feel them coming on? You said you don't really feel them coming on?
It really depends. For the most part, I actually do feel them coming on. All of a sudden, and the biggest indicator is actually my hearing. Like I start to feel like if you talk while you keep your ears covered with your hands, it sounds like you're underwater. And that's actually like how I tell people what it feels like, because that's the first indicator, is like my hearing starts to just all get fuzzy. I
Hmm.
typically can feel it coming on, and so I get down to the ground in those situations. But there have been, like, I would say a handful of times where it just came out of nowhere and I wasn't really ready for it. One which happened on a plane, like an airplane, and I was traveling by myself and I was in a middle seat and I just had no idea. And so all of a sudden I'm like in the lap of the window side passenger. So that's the danger of like when you can't warn someone and they don't actually know what's wrong, and you look young and you look healthy, and so then all of a sudden it could be anything in their mind. So that's, yeah.
Right.
Oh,
People probably
scary.
jump to conclusions. So it sounds like a lot of the triggers can be just a sudden movement if you're not aware, if you stand up too quick or even just roll over in bed or something quickly. How has that impacted your ability to perform in musical theater? With a lot of the dancing and moves, have you had to have conversations with like the choreographers directors on making adjustments for you to be able to avoid anything on stage?
That's a great question. And that's actually something that a lot of people have been curious about because they don't seem to go hand in hand, like having pot syndrome and, syndrome that causes me to faint, feel so dizzy, but then also being a dancer and
Yeah.
pursuing it professionally. Um, I actually, this is something I spoke with my neurologist, is that I actually feel like dancing and the type of exercise and aerobic movement and um, pace of dancing has really been a lifesaver for me because I've been doing it since I was very young. So my body is so used to it that exercise has always been implemented into my regimen in my life. I do wonder what would have happened if I didn't have dance or interest in it because I wonder if I would feel differently or even worse.
Mhm.
Um, so my neurologist always encouraged me. He always said, as long as you can, keep dancing. And so, although I have to look at it a little bit differently now, ironically, dancing has been where I feel, for the most part, best. And I
Mhm.
think that is because, because the disorder involves blood circulation. When I'm dancing and moving, my body is circulating a lot better than when I've been like sitting for five
Yeah.
hours. The thing that can be challenging, I've never had any episode happen when I was performing, or in a class actually. Um, I think the thing that can be challenging is when I don't feel well in general, because I have had that happen where I'll take a very strenuous class. I did like a modern dance intensive in the summer of 2019, so I had just learned about my diagnosis, and then I was training 7, 8 hours a day for 4 weeks. And there was a point where I felt like I was just too physically tired.
Mhm.
Um, that's been an interesting topic because the times I have brought up having a chronic illness to the dance space, it's not, I think it's received with a kind of confusion, which I'm used to. So I've gotten better at explaining what's going on. But for example, my um, senior year of college, when I was training at Alvin Ailey, I had an episode that happened, like a full faint episode, and it took me out of class. So at that point, I had to explain to my advisor, what was going on. And I felt like in that meeting, the second I brought up, the word heart, even if
Mm.
it's in heart rate in the context, all of a sudden people who don't know, you bring up something involving your heart or the way your heart beats, and then all of a sudden there's like a fear. And so her initial reaction was she wanted to send me home for a medical leave, and I told
Mm.
her, that's really actually not what I need. I just need like 3 to 4 days to recuperate, because fainting is like it feels like running a marathon on the body. It's a complete reset. So it's been an interesting journey in that sense of bringing it up. But actually, for the most part, I actually feel best emotionally too. I think that's important to add in, but
Mhm.
mentally, physically, when I actually am dancing.
Yeah, it makes sense because if you're sitting, all that blood's pooling while you're just sitting doing nothing. So that does make sense. But when you talk about, mentioning it as anything with the heart, I bet on the other end, there's a lot of legal things that go through their minds as far as, you know, uh, they have to protect themselves and things of that sort. So I bet that is like a scary conversation to have. Have you had to have conversations with, like, if you're hired for an event or something like that, do you disclose that to them, or you just kind of hope and pray that everything is fine?
It's still a bit of a mix, but I will say I've come to terms with what I have. There was definitely a period of time where it was just not part of my identity, even though I was struggling with it. So I just wasn't,
Yeah.
even for friends, it just wasn't something I felt like I needed to bring up whatsoever because I kind of was rejecting it because I was scared of admitting, like, oh, I have this lifelong chronic illness that doesn't have a cure. Like, that feels very heavy. Um, Now, when I'm hired legally, I do disclaim having a disability. I've been worked different jobs in Manhattan, front desk, like all different types of things in areas where I do fully disclaim having a disability. Um, but then there are times where, maybe I get booked for a short-term dance job where it's a music video or something where I know the time frame is an hour and a half or 2 hours. And in that case, I kind of know now how to make sure um, I'll be okay. But anytime, especially with, I'll add in like medical appointments, that's a time I fully disclose that I will
Yeah.
most likely faint and call ahead of time, have them put a note in. So it's a mix, yeah.
Yeah. And it must be hard with not a lot of information about POTS because before I kind of started this community, I'd never heard of POTS before. And so sometimes there's probably a lot of education on your end of having to educate what this is, what it means, what can happen, and all of that up front, because it's not very well known, you know.
Right. That's been I think one of the biggest challenges with POTS because it's not like type 2 diabetes where you say, okay, I have
Yeah.
this, and it's an understanding. It's like, okay, yes, POTS.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, yeah, the people aren't really aware of the acronym of what it actually means. It's a mouthful to say. You
Yeah.
mentioned heart rate and circulation. It's a little bit confusing. I get a lot of questions like, how do you dance and perform? Aren't you worried you're gonna faint when you perform? And so it's like very interesting to try to explain to people that I'm actually more at risk if I'm
Yeah.
maybe at church or in a museum or in traveling and or standing in outside in the sun than I am in a dance class because of the way that my body is set up.
Hmm.
But it has been a lot of explaining to people, being patient with people, understanding that for many it's uncomfortable to talk about or
Hmm.
uncomfortable to admit, for them to say, oh, you have this illness. And um, I even was dismissed at my own diagnosis appointment by the technician who I very anxiously worried asked her, what will happen if I faint? And she literally said, like, oh, you won't faint. That'd make for a horrible appointment. That'd be an awful day for you, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
I like look over to my mom, and as soon as the neurologist walks in, I'm unconscious. It just happened like that because I knew it would. But again, it's
yeah.
a dismissal that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Especially, how do I word this? Especially when, you're talking about like the white coat syndrome, some people may view that as just, oh, you're scared or, you just are overreacting or you have anxiety about medical appointments and not understanding that there's a tie to an actual syndrome that's causing that to happen. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's,
exactly.
yeah,
I think there's a general misconception that, the brain with anxiety and depression, any mental health issues are disconnected from the body, that it's two separate ideas, that it's very much either mental or physical health. And POTS is one of the syndromes that it involves the vagus nerve, and it is actually connected mentally, physically, in the gut. It's the body is very connected, which I think people forget because, even I've had a GI doctor like recommend meditation, which sounds funny, but the thing is the gut is so connected with it's all about your autonomic, nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
and how to calm the nervous system. I it's interesting with I do have medical anxiety, so because of the way that's manifested, it's a little bit of a vicious cycle for me right now because, you know, with some of the ER visits and medical trauma I have, I, resist or avoid medical spaces. And then when I try to be, open-minded and optimistic, I usually go in and then maybe I can't get the test done successfully because I fainted. So then I revert back and, don't want to go back. It's a little bit of a vicious cycle, but
Mm-hmm.
they're very much connected, and the mind is very, very powerful. So in my case, it's anything invasive, non-invasive. My brain already has decided, like, we don't care. You're
Yeah.
still, you're gonna, your nervous system is gonna kind of just get frazzled and you're going to faint. And so it's a hard thing to calm down in the moment, I would say.
Yeah.
Did you know Spoonful of Strength is not just a podcast? We have an Instagram page called Spoonful of Strength where you can see clips of our upcoming episodes, learn about different illnesses, and we share other people's stories. We also have an Etsy shop where you can shop for clothing such as t-shirts and sweatshirts and hoodies. You can find candles and mugs and tumblers and blankets. You can find it all. We support all chronic illnesses, and the great thing is, if you find a t-shirt in our shop for multiple sclerosis, we can change that for lupus or Ehlers-Danlos or any other illness that you need. Everything is customizable in our shop. Use the code PODCAST for 20% off your entire order.
Yeah. That kind of leads me a little bit to my next question, which is, I always like to ask, when we're interviewing people about the mental side of chronic illness, because even like I have MS and, my mental health, as far as just anxiety of what does my future look like, or anxiety of starting new medication has been a recent one for me, and side effects and all of that. So like if you had to look at it as one big picture, like how did you handle your mental health throughout the diagnosis process and having POTS, so that you took care of the mental part of yourself as well as the physical ailments, because of POTS?
Mm. When I was younger, I always thought trauma was, one thing that happened and it was sudden and it was, like a car accident. And then if you break your arm, you're traumatized and it's hard to get back in the car. And then you finally slowly start to drive again and your arm heals. That was the way I viewed trauma until I had an EMDR therapist who was treating me for a year and a half for my PTSD. And he explained how, it's a trauma in itself to not know what's wrong with you for, in your case, over 10 years. And I never thought about it that way. But as he explained it, I was understanding, being like a young adolescent, especially a young girl, that's where there's a bit of, sadness, I would say, comes up because I was going through these years fighting to keep up with everyone else and, the people who didn't have chronic illness or were, in my mind at that time, quote, normal. And I didn't understand what I was actually fighting and the difference of my body versus someone else's. I would say in the current day, the hardest thing is wondering what I would feel like if I didn't have POTS. I think that's a big question. I wonder a lot about my energy, the way I wake up and go about the day. It's a curiosity, but it's also a little bit of grief about, you kind of like lose the version of yourself who didn't have the chronic illness. And I think those periods of time, to be quite honest, I felt a bit isolated because I was coming to terms with what I had. And when I actually received a diagnosis, I was 20 years old, and it was a mix of half and half of relief and also fear. And I think during those times, having one person who was behind me, a family member who saw all my fainting episodes, was seeing me the times I would collapse or the times I felt very dizzy, and which was my mom. And she just was that person that was like, we need to figure this out. And I do give a lot of credit to her, because I otherwise, at that age just wouldn't have felt I would have felt too isolated and scared to really pursue it. But there came a point where she kind of helped me understand, like, you have a decision to make. You can either really figure out what this is and kind of combat it and start to come to terms with it, or you can keep kind of, going through life unsure of, why you're feeling this way, and why can't you wake up at this time, and why can't you do all these trips or travel normally, or so that was a big, I think, having even just one person who is behind you and not making you feel like, I guess just disregarded. It's just like that validation. That's really what I needed at that time, and at those ages when you're still, coming to terms with even what you look like and who you are. And so since then, it's been definitely still a journey. It's definitely still something I'm mentally coming to terms with, but I'm so much further along than where I once was. And I feel like that's the biggest. It's been like seeing therapists and talking to people, reading books, getting educated, finding support networks online has been huge. That led me to create my own page in 2021 as well, which has been growing and creating a community, and especially conversations like this and the work you both are doing. Those are like what I think just not feeling alone is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned your page. So where can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. It's at undefined by Potts. And the page, you'll see it's a little turquoise ribbon. So I created the page starting in fall of 2021. I was just seeking community, really, and I enjoy, writing as a writer in graphic design. So it became something that I just was having fun with, honestly. And then it started growing, and then I started creating a column of people with POTS. And so I was sending out this form, and I was overwhelmed by the responses. There were so many people that wanted to share their story publicly, and that was really encouraging, because these are people who, primarily women, who are, ages range like 16 years old to 45 to 50 it just is amazing to see everyone's journey, and it's kind of been a way to educate as well, but also find some humor in it, because otherwise it's, it can get very hard.
Yeah. I love your page. I've been, looking over it, and it's very positive, and I like that you throw questions out there, and then, you also have, the educational part like you talked about. So it's a really good page, and we'll make sure and tag it in our or in our description so that people can easily connect to you and find it. What you're doing is really admirable, especially at your age. I can't imagine. I mean, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 21, and I remember, how scary that was. And I'm so glad that you have a supportive mom who is taking care of you, because I also look at it as a mother. I have a 22-year-old, and you know, at that age, you're just getting to know who you are, and there's that point where you almost don't know how to do things without mom, you know, right there, and figuring all that out, and it can be really scary. And we didn't have social media and back then, so I didn't know anybody who had type 1 diabetes for quite a few years. And so I'm so glad that not only do we have communities out there for people, but that you've created a community that's thriving, where people who maybe are recently diagnosed can go to and learn a little bit more, and just have that community for people with POTS. So you should be really proud of yourself for all that you've done.
Oh, thank you so
So
much. That means so much. Yeah, no, it brings me a
yeah,
lot of joy, but yeah, thank you. That's, yeah, I mean, I haven't experienced being a mother, obviously, but I always tell my mom, like, I don't know what I would do without you. And when I say
yeah,
that, I always really do mean it, because, when
yeah.
you're going through something like that, you need a mother who's going to be behind your back.
Yeah,
Um,
you need somebody just to have your back, and be able to ride the ride with you. And so I'm really happy that you have that. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about, or anything that you want to say to our listeners, that you want to share today?
I'll say this, I think sometimes, chronic illness, I used to joke about this with a friend that we would say that bringing up chronic illness in a conversation was kind of bringing up someone who had died. You're not sure if you should bring it up to someone, because it's a hard topic for them and they're grieving. And so a lot of times human nature is just to kind of shy away from bringing up that person. Um, so we'd kind of compare the two. And I think that you know, the more you can actually ask someone about it, um, it's the same way for if they're going through loss is how ask about the person, ask about what they meant to them. It's the same way with chronic illness, just because I only compare them because of sometimes people's reaction and sitting in the uncomfortable feeling of not quite knowing how to talk about it. And so I think if people on the outside of the community knew how open and how much people with chronic illness would like to share and like to talk about it, um, it would just make it so much more easy, because I think dismantling the stigma of chronic illness is something that I'm just starting to figure out and understand and try to work towards with my page and community. But I think that's one of the biggest isolating factors, is feeling like there's something wrong with me, but everyone else is normal. And I think that
Yeah.
mindset and that separation of disability and non-disabled is something that can be uncomfortable for both sides, but
Mhm.
especially people without disabilities. I've had people even ask like what to call it. I've had people say I have a disease or an autoimmune something, and that
Yeah.
it's not out of negativity, it's just out of ignorance. They just don't know. And so
Mhm.
the more you can help explain, it just takes away the taboo factor of chronic illness. And I think especially for young women, that's just so important, is making them feel like, you know, empowered and taking, that's why my page is called Undefined by POTS, because it is, regardless of if it's not POTS, if it's EDS or any of, any chronic illness really, it's taking all that it is, but understanding all that you are with it. And I know that's easier said than done, but it's basically the idea of, not letting that diagnosis define who you are, because they may define your everyday and it may define your life for the rest of your life, but not letting it define the essence of really who you are and who you always have been and who you were when you were born and growing up.
Where'd you get all this wisdom? That was beautifully said. Where did you get all of that?
Thank you.
So beautiful. I mean, it really is. The more we talk about chronic illness and the more that we just keep having the discussion, the one thread that's gone through all of these interviews that we've done, and we've talked with people with all different illnesses from all around the country, the one thread is that we're all going through the same thing, even though we're not going through the same thing, but we're all in this position of just having something that is going to stay with us every day for the rest of our lives and dealing with that in different severities and things like that. So just beautifully said. And we just can't thank you enough for coming on today and sharing your story. It's been just a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really my pleasure. I'm so happy it was able to happen, and the way it did happen when I was messaging you, trying to get on the first season, and I'm just really happy it aligned because I really enjoyed it, and I love the work you're doing. It's fabulous,
awesome.
And it's much needed.
It was so funny because I had sent you that message like, oh, we're full. And then I went back to Tina and I said, our schedule is at 29 episodes. And I said, we've got to fit Miranda in. Then we can have 30 for the first season. Because 29 didn't seem right. So we're like, let's make the schedule work. And so we can end on a nice round number. And so I'm glad that it all worked out as well. So
Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun. It was wonderful.
Well, that was a great interview with Miranda. Tina, I'm sorry that we missed you for half of the interview, but I tell you what, she is really inspiring, just the way that she thinks, and she was diagnosed at a very young age with POTS, and especially being a dancer, how scary that can be, and it was real interesting. She was talking about, with chronic illness, a lot of times we have those questions of whether to disclose our illness or to keep it private. And so we had a good conversation about how she handles those situations and whatnot, but it was very interesting because as a dancer, she actually seems to have less symptoms when she's dancing, as opposed to, I believe she said she actually hadn't had a moment of passing out from dancing. But it's one of those things that, I mentioned to her that having to disclose that can be very difficult for an employer, even if it's somebody who, a commercial or a play or anything like that, for them to take on a potential risk of fainting mid-performance. And so that was an interesting discussion.
Yeah. Kind of a tough decision, because it's something that's kind of important for those that she's going to be working with to know, but at the same time, you don't want to run the risk of not getting the part that she's going after because what she's disclosed. So
we also talked about what a great support system that she has. So I'm really glad, we were talking a little bit about her age at the time. She was about 20 getting diagnosed, and I have a 22-year-old, and I know how hard it is when it comes to health decisions and things like that, because technically they're adults, but they're still in that beginning stages of figuring out life. And she was real fortunate to be able to have her mom stick with her through the diagnosis process.
Right.
One more thing that I thought that was interesting, and I want your take on this, is we were talking right at the end about what she would tell somebody who may be going through this. And she really talked about the stigma of talking about chronic illness. And
Mm,
it brought up, she talked about how people who don't have the chronic illness may be hesitant to bring up somebody's chronic illness to them.
right,
And one of the things that I instantly thought about was the fact that being the person with the chronic illness, of feeling like everybody's lives are going on, that sometimes it's nice for them to recognize that you have the chronic illness so that you
right,
don't feel like that there's like a fine line between somebody always mentioning your chronic illness and always talking about it versus being the person with chronic illness and feeling like they get it and they care about me and they're going to ask me how I feel and all of that. um
right.
what's your thoughts on just family, friends kind of stigma about talking about it?
Yeah. It can be a tough call. I definitely have, there's some people in my life that I know I can count on and reach out and talk about, and keep in the loop and talk about the things that I deal with, and other ones that I know that I feel like their reaction or lack of reaction would cause me more frustration. So it's,
I get that.
um, but I think a big part of that is I've been dealing with it long enough that I've eventually have become to realize that. But when you're newly diagnosed, you're wanting, I guess part of you at least is expecting the people that you consider the closest and most important to be the ones to rally around you. So it can be hard when you're not getting that support.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad she does have a good support system with her mom, and just talked beautifully about everything that her mom has done for her. So I'm excited to see what she's got in store for her in the upcoming months and years. I really enjoyed talking about theater and acting and dancing and all that. That's just, I don't know. I think it's exciting to be a New York dancer. It's something kind of exciting about that lifestyle.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love, well, we both lit up as soon as when she
Yeah,
started talking about the musical theater. We both love, I know you used to be you were show choir, right? In
I
high
was
school.
in show choir. Yes, yes.
And I was involved in theater. Usually I prefer behind the scenes, more of like stage crew or stage manager, but I've always loved theater. So I was, yeah, she was really interesting to talk
Yeah,
to. Um,
yeah.
on that,
And she,
and the New York experience, and to be so young and so focused on her goals and what she wants, and didn't think anything of moving from the West Coast to New York City.
for as young as she was just very well spoken, and I really enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah. And she was very, very knowledgeable, and that's the one thing that I've been impressed with all of our guests are just their I think for some people they get diagnosed with a chronic illness and they don't, they take whatever the information is that's given to them by their doctors, and then that's, and recommended treatments and stuff, and they don't dig more into that. But all of our, I mean, that's why I love having all our guests, because they're all so well, they're they're invested in themselves and in their chronic illness and learning how to manage it
Mhm.
and raising awareness out there.
For us, we've listened to all of these stories, but each one kind of hits us a different way. We'll definitely link her Instagram bio, and you definitely want to follow her page. It's very positive, and she talks a lot about what POTS is and getting to know her a little bit. So she highlights people in the community that also have POTS and gives them a chance to tell their story similar to what we do here. So now this week again, today was Tuesday, which is normally not our interview days, but for this second week in a row, we are doing double interviews. So this Thursday, we have Julie coming on, and Julie is going to talk about her illness with Chiari malformation and scoliosis. She's going to talk about her job that allows her to work with people with chronic illness outdoors. And so that's really interesting to hear about what she's doing in her job. And it's a great interview, and we are very excited for you to listen to that coming this Thursday. We only have a few weeks left, Tina, of season one. Can you believe it?
I know. I can't believe that by the time we're done, we'll have done 30 podcasts. That's crazy. It doesn't seem, I can't believe that we've done that many of them.
Yes, we have 2 more weeks left. And we are working on some things for the finale. So just to kind of recap our season and do some fun stuff. So stay tuned for some information possibly coming out about our finale. And it's going to be fun. We hope that you have a good week. We'll talk to you on Thursday, and take care.